So, Preach finished Heavensward. And I've been missing out on some Preach updates when it comes to his progression on Final Fantasy XIV. So let's catch up to it. I can already see that Horschenfant is there. And he's got tears. In the thumbnail, there's Horschenfant, then there's tears and Preach. Here's an interesting thing, right? Notice how Preach's thumbnail has tears. And now if you go and you see Rurikhan Heavensward, because I also did I did my own thoughts every time that I would finish one of the expansions. I also have tears in my thumbnail. Everybody's got tears in their Heavensward thumbnail. Look at that. I was like, my thoughts on Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward. Damn, this video's got 20,000 views. That's not bad. That's not bad at all.
Just dropping by to say hello. I'm busy but will tune in if stream is still on later. Ruri praise.
Arcacel, thank you very much for being grossly incandescent for 2 months. Tip of the hat. Appreciate the support. I'll see you later if you can come back. All right, let's get to it.
Game ever moved me to tears. That was a couple of years ago. Only once in my life has a video game ever moved me to tears. That was a couple of years ago in a video game called Rime, and it's not because I'm a heartless, soulless, cold machine. It's just that for the most part, video game stories are somewhat predictable. They're cliche, and very rarely do you get something that moves you absolutely. I've been close a couple of times, but Heavensward just pretty much did that, and it's definitely worth talking about. This is.
By the way, if you haven't finished Heavensward, there's probably going to be spoilers in this video. So, just a warning, we're watching this. So if you haven't finished Heavensward, I'm sorry. Maybe you shouldn't watch this unless you don't care. But yeah, let's get into it. And also, if he cried already during Heavensward, you better get yourself some tissues, Mike. Because when you get the Shadowbringers, the waterworks are really going to do a number on you.
Video game storytelling done about as good as it can possibly be. Let's take a look. One of the biggest problems MMOs always face, and this is for every MMO, is the ability to tell an RPG story, because RPG stories have come a very, very long way since the early days. Not to say that early days RPG stories aren't some of the best, still to this day, ever written. And I always refer back to Chrono Trigger as being one of the most intense, heart-pounding stories ever told in an RPG, as well as in the Baldur's Gate series, and the list goes on. But MMOs have a difficulty, and that's because most of them ascribe to a very simple creed. Everybody should be able to play together as much as they want. There should be nothing in the game that's saying you can't play with your friends, because that's what an MMO is all about, teaming up. And often, when you present yourself with video game choices as opposed to movies, which just play out in a linear fashion, you present people with choices. You look to any games like the Fallout series or the Witcher series, and you're constantly making decisions, and in the good RPGs, they play out in a number of different ways depending on the path you have chosen. That's fine in a single-player environment. However, when it comes to MMOs, it makes it extraordinarily difficult because often you want to present the player with choices that naturally would dictate that they can no longer associate with their friends if they went in a different way. That does not mean it's impossible, and I think it's one of the biggest issues that MMO companies of next year and the next 10 years are going to be finding ways of introducing that style into their games and finding a way to allow it to work, because frankly, it's those weighty, meaningful choices, pardon the pun, that make things matter. However, that doesn't mean you can't tell a great, if not a fantastic story in an MMO. That doesn't mean that whatsoever, and if you want proof of the pudding, it would be Heavensward in Final Fantasy XIV. I spoke to you at length in the last update I did to Heavensward about how much I was enjoying the story. It had been told to me almost in a meme fashion that it was critically acclaimed, that it was just the most extraordinary thing ever. I even shipped two characters, which would have been Estinian and Lady Iceheart, up until the point I was in the story. Needless to say, for those of you who played Heavensward, that did not work out. That did not work out whatsoever.
Not really.
That's sad.
This cutscene right here, by the way, it's like, I'm be completely real, because you guys know I streamed the whole thing on Twitch, and a lot of times I purposefully and very intentfully suppressed my emotions, because otherwise I would have cried on stream. It's like In those moments, if you go back and you watch the YouTube videos, you'll notice that I just go silent. Whenever something very important happens in the story, I'll go silent because I know that if I speak, my voice is going to crack. And if you go and you watch the video where I did the best moments or whatever, the moments that marked me the most in Final Fantasy XIV, you can kind of hear my voice crack while I'm just trying to describe the cutscenes. Like a big portion of me editing that video, I was actually like tearing up most of the time. So yeah, 100%. Soulman 1972, thank you very much for the bits. Tip of the hat. Appreciate the support. Thank you. But yeah, this cutscene was rough watching it. And it's like you get hit by what happens in the cutscene. And to me, there was like two key emotional moments in this cutscene, which is the first one is obviously when the stuff happens to her. And she's just like, she sacrifices herself to ensure that we get to Ozzy's lost safety. But there's the first hit of when okay, that's it. She's dead. And then there's the second hit of Alphino screaming, "No!" It's like, yeah.
Really sad. But today, I actually don't want to put any spoilers in this, because I know a number of people are not actually up to where I am, because as anybody who's recently joined FF14, I do get to stream the game, which means I can put in 8-9 hours a day as part of my regular work day, and that means that I moved ahead of a lot of people, including some people who work at Preach Gaming, who are trying to play whatever they can when they're not doing stuff for me in the background.
The editor.
So I'm not going to do that. What I am going to talk to you about a little is how this storytelling can be done right, and how Heavensward has reached what I would consider the number 2 spot on my best video game stories ever told. For those of you wondering, the number 1 story for me is still the Shadow Man in Divinity Original Sin 2. That is because that game is a single-player game, and that allowed them to afford you to make the most soul-crushing choice imaginable in a video game, and they set it up super well. But the setup is the important part here. So I guess this is more of a comment for anybody thinking about Heavensward, especially those of you who are prone to skipping story in MMOs, perhaps because you've got an extensive background in something like World of Warcraft, where generally reading those text boxes just isn't worth your time. Ultimately, you might end up reading something like 3 or 4.
Again, it's so important to mention this, particularly when somebody comes from World of Warcraft to 14. It is so important to mention that, look, this is an extremely different game. You really, really, really don't want to be skipping through the story because you're missing out on so much. I mean, to give you guys an idea, yesterday I was asking Eric's what he thought about the music of Final Fantasy XIV. And you guys don't want to know the answer to that question. Let's just say he turned the music back on after I told him to do it, okay?
Paragraphs to find out you need to go east of the cave in order to kill the 10 Defias mobs. Very standard stuff, and it's the first thing, similar to Path of Exile, that turns you off from listening to a very long diatribe that ultimately results in something very, very simple, and you feel like you've had your time wasted, and so the next time you just skip it and read whatever the TLDR version is in your quest log. Let's talk a little bit about Heavensward. At least the second half is Heavensward. I'm about to complete Heavensward's main story. I have one patch to go, which from what I can tell is going to be the setup for the next expansion for the most part, but perhaps not. And how it nearly, pretty much did bring me to tears. I didn't bawl like a baby, but my eyes welled up significantly. And this involves the wonderful, and what I want to talk about, and hopefully put this message out to other devs that we are working with who are working on RPGs, and you'll hear more about that in the future, is how important it is to take your goddamn time. In the last video, some of you responded well to me comparing it a little bit to the Marvel versus DC worlds, which many of us are familiar with, and how we saw DC's universe try and rush everything through to catch up, in a sense, to the Marvel universe. And they didn't take their time. They didn't let these stories breathe. They didn't let their characters grow. And it was a recent video I watched from Red Letter Media about Midnight Mass, where they applauded, and I agreed fully, that they let their characters breathe. They let their characters talk. They let their characters establish a personality, a backstory, how they currently feel, how they used to feel, and how their minds are changing and evolving in a nice, slow way, which made you care about those characters. And for the things I want to talk about today, there's basically two. Ultimately, a storyline in Final Fantasy XIV eventually somewhat encompasses maybe 30 primary characters. And Heavensward very much does that. It involves high houses of Ishgard, it involves their militant arm, it involves their religious wing, it involves storylines developing from a realm reborn with characters who happen to be nearby. It happens to involve stories that take place in lands that you haven't seen yet, which came with the expansion. So ultimately you end up dealing with about 50 characters. Now that's a lot, and it's a lot to make them important. And what did they do? They took their goddamn time. But ultimately, they had a roadmap. And recently, when 9.2 was announced in World of Warcraft, I talked at length about how important it is to have that roadmap, to say, we're starting here and we're ending there. And ultimately, when it comes to storytelling, they decided, actually, this just needs a couple of payoffs, but the big payoff, the really big payoff that really matters, is just going to be between two characters. And in order for that situation to have that level of payoff, those two characters need to feel and experience, and the player needs to understand the heartache and emotion and the nightmare world that is around them. And those two characters would be Sir Emmerich and the dragon Hrelsvagar. Now, not going into too much detail of them, again, I would love you guys to experience this. Certainly those of you who may have bought a pass and skipped in order and to get past the story, because the story is lengthy, there's no doubt about that. But to understand, this is worth going back and playing. And it's I can see now, in many ways, how upset people get when it's like, you're not appreciating what's here. If you skip, you're not appreciating what's been done here. Now, story isn't for everybody.
Now, Preach, I'm not sure if I get what you're saying. You're trying to say that Jorval was not an interesting character? You guys think that's what Preach is getting at? You guys think that maybe we should have known a little bit more about Jorval? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe if we knew just a little bit more about Jorval, then maybe. Dude, this cracked me up so much when we watched this and suddenly he just pulls out friggin' Jorval.
Buddy, I'm not going to even claim it is. I know plenty of people who I could tell them it's the best book in the world. They're never going to read it. It's the best movie I've ever seen. Never going to watch it. I understand that. But for those of you who have some inkling of video game stories and maybe have an MMO past who is used to waiting just for the big cutscenes and things like that to tell you what's going on, this is a totally different experience. Those two characters are designed to be the ultimate payoff to this ending. And all of the 48 characters, however many there are, that are just the side attractions to this, are all playing a pivotal role leading to this one moment. And this one moment requires such a roller coaster to get there that it's unbelievable that it was so clearly paced and planned for multiple patches. Now, I want to think about that in multiple patches, because we've probably got, some of you will probably say, oh, the story's been set out, and recently with ties to like, oh, we're ending Warcraft 3, which kind of technically is true with some sliding stuff in there. But you can see that this is not a character that was developed a long time ago. This is a character that's new, and they've tried to squeeze it in here and there and use references of past to make it make some sort of sense. This is a case of saying, no, this is where this goes, and we need all these elements to happen all along the way in order for this to work. And if we don't do that, it won't have the gravitas we want it to have. And the players aren't going to be shattered into 1,000 pieces when this happens. They won't understand the weight of this choice. They won't understand how they could make two characters so distinctly different. One, a dragon who has lived practically for eternity, that made a choice 1,000 years ago, which reflects the same choice. A man born in a ultra-religious society and was a bastard child and all those kind of things, who had to make a similar choice. And between those two, they managed to bring about the end of a 1,000-year war. And for good reason. Because they were able to connect on a way that makes absolute sense. And when you see that connection happen, that's when it gets you. Now, I did say it brought me to tears. That wasn't the story that brought me to tears. What did, actually, was the send-off for a main character. Now, here's another thing why I wanted to talk about story mainly today, is that one thing that really baffled me, and again, this comes back to the roadmap idea. One thing that super baffled me was at the end of A Realm Reborn. In the space of maybe 10 minutes, they set up something like 7 really important plot points with differing characters. They killed off major characters. In a space of 10 minutes, they made massive sweeping changes. Instead of having a nice tidy bow to wrap up and say, we're done here, this part of the game is done, we're going on to the next part of the game. Instead, they said, we kind of wrapped it up before, now it's all turning into this. And very quickly, everything unravels and that nice pretty bow is ripped to shreds on the floor, and it's now time to move on to something else. And they had the goddamn balls to not address some of those things that they set up all those many years and months ago until the very end of the expansion, leaving you constantly worrying. Not worrying, but more theorizing, suspecting, questioning yourself. And I posted on Twitter, it's like, after you play this, you don't trust anybody. Because you're constantly going, well, what's happened to this person? And you know, because the storytelling's done so well, that that person has a role to play. But they're letting it breathe. And there's a trust that I've already developed, even though this story's already out and I could Google it and Wikipedia it, and perhaps it all falls apart in the future, I don't know. But there's a trust there, it's like, they're going to make it happen. You know it's coming back, because they don't forget about these things. They don't just dispense with what's happened in the past. They don't just leave the giant dagger in the planet and say, we'll talk about it next time.
You guys remember that? You guys remember when Sargeras stabbed Azeroth? That was like 2 expansions ago. That was like 2 expansions ago. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about that at all, dude. Don't even worry about it. We'll figure it out at some point.
Going to be referenced. You know they're going to deal with it, and you know they're going to tidy it up. And as I mentioned, as many of you will know by now, that they killed off so many characters at the end of Realm Reborn, and they did a send-off, essentially, to one of those main characters. And they did it in a way that felt ridiculous at the start. And this is what kind of pays off. And it very much reminds me of the Hideo Kojima games. Is they're often seemingly ridiculous and cheesy and kind of silly. And in this case, it was the Warriors of Darkness. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh my God. Really? This is gross. This is so cheesy.
Oh, you think the Warriors of Darkness are cheesy, Preach? Oh, you think that's cheesy? Oh, man. Oh, man, you're fucked, Preach. Oh, just wait until you choke on those words, baby. Just wait until you choke on those words, dude.
The end of their story crushed me completely. I was like, oh my God. And I felt again what I felt when I started a Final Fantasy.
What do you mean, the end of their story, Preach? What's that supposed to mean?
14.
You haven't seen the end of their story?
Which is that the Lalafell, I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to deal with Lalafell and Moogles. And then ultimately I ended up in love with that story. Not exactly like loving the Lalafells, but in love with that story. And it made me care about them, and it made me interested in them. And to have this kind of moment happen with the Warriors of Damned Darkness. Warrior of Light. Well, we're the Warriors of Darkness. Like, okay. Sure, dude. To have that happen and to be sat here like... is everything done right? And I hope this conversation encourages some of you, even if you skip the story, just to go back and... This is the stupid thing about FF14, which is so impossible. And recently I went through that I had a friend leave World of Warcraft, who was a world first raider from Vanilla, world first at Kel'Thuzad, of all places. Joined FF14 because 9.15 did not bring anybody back to World of Warcraft. And he's like, well, I should come and play Final Fantasy. And I was like, look, dude. He's like, what should I do? What class? And he made all those classic mistakes that I made. He's like, what class should I play? Does my race matter? What's the best gear I'm looking... You know, all the usual stuff that you would associate with a World of Warcraft game. And I'm like, it's not like that. It's not like that at all. You need to go it in a different way. And they both have their strengths. And I know World of Warcraft's not doing great right now, but it's still it's still one of my favorite games of all time. And then he skipped the story and he just was like, so much dialogue. Like, I can't be bothered. there's a little Lalafell queen. There's a guy shouting at me and so on, and he skipped. And I've no doubt he probably won't last because it's not that he's now at endgame. He went straight to the endgame. Let's go for the endgame. Let's go raiding and do dungeons and things. I'm like, it's not really like that. It's not that kind of game. And he's like, okay. And I was like, come and look at the houses. And he's like, all right. You know what I mean? It's very difficult to explain it to people, which is probably why I didn't get involved in the first place. But I did. I have done Alexander as well. At the moment, we're not doing the Savages until after I've finished the MSQ of Heavensward. I'm saving that content for then. But even that story, I'm blown away, man, every time. And I feel like a shill, but it's hard to describe this content that is so old and not just go and fucking play it. And I know many of you watch this who already played it. You're like, we know, the streamer didn't know or YouTuber didn't know, but now you know. But it's also my duty to say to anybody out there who's just to inform you of good things, right?
It's like there's gonna be people that are gonna bring that mentality. It's like I said, it's actually a genuine problem, a genuine negative effect that World of Warcraft has had in the industry. And here's the thing. I would argue that it doesn't just affect 14 when people come over to 14. It affects so many different games. Because like, for instance, you guys remember when I was playing Outriders? I was playing Outriders. I took my time. It took me a long time to get to the end of the game because I played it on the hardest difficulty. And, it was just a slow going. It was slow going. But I had fun along the way before I got to the end game. There's a bunch of people who went through Outriders. They're just like, skip. I don't need cutscenes. I don't need nothing. Skip. Let's go. Let's play easiest mode. Let's go. The only thing that matters is the end game. Then they got to the end game and they're like, oh. This is not that great. And then they're like, oh, this game doesn't actually have end game. And it's like, yeah. You skipped the fucking game. You literally skipped it. Why did you do that? Because you've been trained by World of Warcraft. There's people who do this on so many games, on so many different games. They just skip the actual game. And then they get to the ending of the game, they're like, there's nothing to do. No, you reached the end. You're at the end. No, there's nothing to do. You finished it. Congratulations. It's like, what the fuck, dude? It is. It's just the way that people get trained by World of Warcraft for that. That's the thing. It's like, that's why I wasn't able to enjoy Final Fantasy XIV when I played in 2013, because I was playing it like World of Warcraft. I was like, oh, just grab all the quests, finish all the quests. Story gives a fuck about story. I don't give a fuck about what's happening in here. Let's go. Let's go. Turn everything in. Let's go. Go fast. Gotta maximize my XP gain so that I get to level 50 super fast so that I can start doing like the dungeons that actually matter and the raids that actually matter. And it's like World of Warcraft has poisoned millions of people's minds to only care about the latest content that is added into a game. And unfortunately, it's terrible, but we are still feeling the effects of that. Like Preach's friend, who he got from World of Warcraft to try this out, like he said, he's not going to last because dude just skipped everything, doesn't give a fuck about nothing. It's like, yeah, he's not going to last. Like the other day we were watching the video by the Soul So Breezy, and it's like he skipped the Shadowbringers, and then he's like, I don't understand what the fuck's going on. Yeah, that's because you skipped the Shadowbringers. You're not supposed to understand what's going on. You skipped. It's like, how do you want to understand? I thought I was like, wow, that's why I skipped. Yeah. It's like a lot of people skip the stuff, and it's like, this game is just not like that. There's just so much cool stuff to do. I feel like that mentality has negatively affected storytelling in the gaming industry as a whole. 100%. Dude, like, World of Warcraft, for all the good that it's done, and it has done some good, because, you know, at the end of the day, like, you know, Vanilla, Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, those are still fantastic experiences as far as I'm concerned, right? Like, I still think about I always talk about it, like Howling Fjord. I still think about Howling Fjord, and I remember how I felt during that week that I took off work. Every time that I would log into World of Warcraft, and, you know, and I would hear the Howling Fjord music, and I'd be running around doing quests and shit. Like, those are just like amazing gaming memories, right? So it's like, it still did some good, but at the end of the day, it also did a lot of bad because, you know, I fucking powered through so much in Wrath of the Lich King to just like, let's go, go, go. And this week I got to get the cap, because after that I'm going back to work and I'm not going to have as much time to play the game. You know, it is what it is. And it's like, if somebody starts in 14, like, that's always the advice that I give them. It's like, listen, take your time. I know that Endwalker's coming out in December. I know you're real excited to play Endwalker, but do like me. I played it when Shadowbringers came out, and I played it from the beginning, and I did all the raids, and I did all the stuff at the relevant expansions and all that. And eventually I got the Shadowbringers, and the game was way better for it. And that is how you create like a lasting attachment to 14, is you just take your time with it. Because if you skip, you're not going to create a lasting attachment to this game. It's just not going to happen.
Just to inform you of good things, I'm going to move into the more gameplay stuff after this. I'm going to hit the end of this story tomorrow. And then we've got extremes and things that I want to do, which is the gameplay side, which has been getting better and better and better. So I'm hoping to experience that. But I just wanted to sit down and say, this is how it's done. Slow and steady. Let it breathe. And don't even show your hand. I had no idea those two characters would be the pinnacle of what this was supposed to be. I had no idea. They're in the story, but so are 48 other characters who all have their own important, well-developed roles to play. They are all there. They're all thrown in there, and they allow development of every single one of them to carry forward into the next one, and to make them stronger and better characters, or even people you look down upon now, or distrust heavily, even though you want to trust them. And that's the kind of investment and immersion you want out of your games. And it's right here. So, thank you so much for listening. And I hope that maybe have changed a few minds. I'll see you again. So there you have it. That is my current take on Heavensward, and I am literally about to walk into Stormblood tomorrow and see what's waiting for me there. I'll be amazed if it gets better than this, but I'm...
Dude, this is Stormblood. The beginning of Stormblood. The Ruby Sea. Oh, no, dude. Ruby Sea is the perfect time for you to take a break. That's what I'll say when it comes to 14. It's like, listen, if you've been burning the candle on both ends during Heavensward, Ruby Sea is the perfect time. Just like, hey, you know what? I'm going to sit back and I'm going to be back later, all right? I'm going to be back later. I mean, I kind of feel like that's what I did.
I'm assured by many in the community it will get better, and perhaps I will be able to topple that #1 spot on my best ever video game stories ever told. A lot of people keep asking me questions of things that I simply can't answer. And one of those would be like, how does the gameplay feel now? Because in your earlier Realm Reborn videos, you're very clear that you prefer World of Warcraft's gameplay. Well, I can't answer that right now because I'm essentially comparing like a Burning Crusade quality character. I'm not up to the end of Final Fantasy, and I can't compare a current day World of Warcraft character to this. I remember when TBC Classic launched that I went back in and was suddenly awestruck by just how slow and tedious the gameplay was there. So at the moment, really hard to compare and say how it's going. I will say, like, straight up right now, yeah, I still prefer World of Warcraft's combat, but it is getting better. I've picked up so much extra stuff for my character that I think the next expansion might bring us even closer into what I would consider really fun gameplay. And I really hope that happens as well. Along with all the housing stuff we've been doing and everything else, Heavensward has been a magnificent journey. I'm not, although I am going to reach Stormblood tomorrow, in terms of the story, I still have a supreme amount of content to do in the Heavensward, and I'm going to do that before I move on to Stormblood. So that would be Hildebrand, doing the Alliance raids, the big raids, and also dealing with the extremes and the Savage raids, things like that. I'm going to be picking up all the extra bits of content before I even move on. I want to be complete before we get forward. So be sure to check out my thoughts on the actual raiding. I have done Alexander, as you saw in this video, but I haven't done it properly, or at the level I would want to do it. So watch out for that one, and we'll be back with you soon. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you again. Bye-bye.
I'm still surprised. I'm still surprised that someone like Preach. Oops, sorry. There we go. I'm still surprised that someone like Preach, whom I've always seen more as like a competitive raider, and you know that's kind of like the stuff that he was doing. He was always talking about raiding and the raid composition and raid strategies and min-maxing and all of this stuff. It is still surprising to basically just see Preach go and just actually take his time checking out the story and stuff. That's like a side of him that I hadn't seen as much, at least on the YouTube side of things, because on YouTube he's mostly just like, used to be mostly just like Warcraft. So that's pretty cool. And I think that if Preach can get stuck into the story of 14, I think that there's a lot of like hardcore, exactly, like Shadowmancer is saying. I also said Asmund wouldn't last. I'm definitely surprised. Warcraft has a story. Well, it had one. Now it, you know, it's weird. Like I said, I used to really care about World of Warcraft story, and I know that for a lot of people this was not the breaking point, but for me the breaking point of World of Warcraft story was Warlords of Draenor. It's like, oh, alternate timeline, orcs, and now this alternate timeline thing creates an alternate future and an alternate past, and I was like, oh my god, dude, this is some like, what are you talking about? What? It's like so weird. But yeah.